Hey guys, it's Chris. From the remains of headless gladiators to bodies being found in trees, join me as I explore 9 scary discoveries found buried underground. Number 9. Headless Gladiators. In York, England, a large set of skeletal remains were found buried, with something very odd going on. This may not seem like something too scary at first, but when the remains were fully uncovered, they found that every single person that was buried there was missing their head. What's more, they were buried with their heads, which made it even odder and really terrifying. After some research and study, scientists dated the bodies back to around the 2nd and 4th centuries AD. This led to speculation that these might have been gladiators. This was further speculated when the bones of the victims were shown to have clear battle wounds. Another speculation believes that these could be soldiers due to the wounds present. No matter what though, this raises a very disturbing question. Regardless of whether they were a soldier or a gladiator, why were they decapitated and then buried with their heads? It's clear they weren't thrown in, they were placed in very specific spots from body to body. This shows extreme care and detail, but to what end? We'll likely never know. Plus, it also makes one wonder if there are more pits like these scattered around the world. What would you do if you found a burial pit like this? The whole thing seems a little absurd and absolutely unsettling. Let me know if you'd be scared out of your mind or not. Send your answer in a comment below, and while you're down there, subscribe if you haven't already. There are loads of awesome videos coming out all the time, and you don't want to miss even a single one. Number 8. A cinema in the Paris Catacombs. This particular story seems like something out of a novel or a movie, but I promise you it's real. It happened back in 2004 in the actual Paris Catacombs of legend. If you don't know, these catacombs were made in Paris, France, because the cemeteries in the city were overrun with bodies. Thus, since there were numerous tunnels underneath the city, the people of Paris felt it would be very easy to put the remaining bodies there. And they have been doing that ever since. But that's where things stop getting ordinary, because during a training exercise beneath the Palais de Chaillot, across the Seine from the Eiffel Tower, a police group found a cinema that was 60 feet below the surface and was fully functional and was clearly used recently. Needless to say, the police were stunned and immediately tried to figure out who housed up there. According to the authorities, they found multiple different symbols painted on the walls down there. Apparently, it was hard to make sense of what organization or group might have been associated with this place. The police hypothesized that it was some religious sect, cult, or secret society. In truth, there are any number of possibilities. This wasn't just a place that looked like a cinema, it was a fully functioning one too. One with electricity, phone wires, and even a bar. But wait, there's more. Because when the police came back 3 days later with extra people to examine the place, the cinema had been tampered with. The electricity and the phone lines were cut, and a note was on the door saying, "Do not try to find us." Having your own private cinema? That's not scary, that's awesome. Having your own private cinema in a massive catacomb surrounded by the skulls of many dead people? Well, yeah, that's kind of something else. This is one movie theater I won't be going to. How about you? Would you want to go see a film down there underneath the streets of Paris? Definitely let me know in the comments below. Number 7. Burials for vampires. What might be one of the scariest things of all is seeing how people of history dealt with things that they were terrified of, including what they perceived as monsters. The fear of vampires, for example, was a real thing for a long time in the ancient and medieval world. The kind of vampire that they feared were the ones that rose from the dead and would siphon people's blood. So various nations decided to combat that in their own way. In Eastern Europe, the Polish, as well as people from other countries like Bulgaria, for example, decided to take their precautions to rather unsettling levels by making sure that potential vampires stayed dead. If a person died and the fear that they would become a vampire was prevalent, they were buried with a sickle around their neck, likely to chop off the beast's head should it rise up. Others had massive stones wedged between their jaws so that if they rose, they couldn't suck out people's blood. Then there were graves that had an iron rod shoved through where the heart would be. What might be the most tragic part of this discovery was that it wasn't from over a millennia ago, it was only about 700 years ago. This shows that this kind of fear made people do rather irrational things, including desecrating the bodies of the dead. Number 6. Screaming mummies. In 1886, a famed archaeologist named Gaston Maspero was doing work in Egypt. And as his job as head of the Egyptian Antiquities Service, he was examining mummies and taking down notes on them. When he opened one particular one, however, he found that the mummy was screaming. To be clear, this wasn't anything supernatural, as it was a mummy in a sarcophagus, but the pose and posture of the mummy made it look like it was screaming. This naturally led to much speculation as to how this could happen, for usually mummies are so properly prepared that they actually have to be moved out of the state they've been in for centuries. Degradation like this doesn't happen in mummification, or at least that's what they believed in regards to previous examples and specimens. Ideas of torture or being murdered before being put in the coffin were thrown out by scientists. The truth, however, was much simpler than that. The process for mummification wasn't followed properly. When we die, our bodies go rigid via a process called rigor mortis. However, after a while, our body relaxes and allows all the muscles in our body to elongate once more. Mummies are the same way. And because of this, if the jaw isn't fastened, which is a practice in proper mummification, it'll go slack and go open. As time goes on, the look of the mummy goes from being perfectly preserved to a body that looks like it is indeed screaming at the person looking at it. As if to help prove this fact, more screaming mummies were discovered all over the world, and some were found to have actual jaw straps on the mummy that broke, causing the condition upon being found. So while scary, it's at least something that was understood by examination. So there won't be a horror movie becoming real life from these mummies, at least not yet. Number 5. Skulls at the bottom of a lake. In Sweden, in 2009, some archaeologists were excavating a dried-up lake bed. And near the bottom of the lake, they found a sealed structure, which, let's be honest, is not the kind of thing you'd expect to find at the bottom of a lake. Within that stone structure was a set of 11 skulls. What's odd is what happened to these skulls. Many were impaled, some of them were burnt to a crisp, and one of them was literally shoved inside another skull. That's absolutely terrifying to think about on many levels. It should also be noted that these skulls were alone. No bodies were attached to them. So what did the people who killed these people do to their skulls? No one really knows, but it's scary the lengths that they went to in order to mutilate and torture these skulls. The common belief is that this was some kind of Stone Age burial, but as to what end, no one is sure, especially since many of them were buried in various ways instead of one uniform one like most rituals would have. Number 4. JUANITA. On Mount Amparo, located in the Argentina-Chile border, some scientists were doing some studies when they came across a young woman's body buried in the ice of the mountain. Specifically, it was found in a crater near a site at the summit of the mountain that had previously belonged to the Incan people. What instantly made this body so interesting was the state it was in. Her body was preserved because of the cold, so much so that her skin, clothes, and certain other things on her were almost perfectly intact. This was the spectacular result of nature mummifying the body. This makes sense as the body was located about 20,000 feet above sea level, meaning that the thin air and temperatures led it to being perfectly preserved like it was. But why was she there on the mountain in the first place? Scientists believe that this girl was an Incan sacrifice to their gods in the 15th century. One of their deities was a volcano god, which they believed to reside in Mount Amparo. This was proven by the fact she had significant blood force trauma to her head, which indicates that another person struck her with a superficial blow to make it real. 3 more bodies were found in the crater and on that mountain later on, though none were as intact as JUANITA, as the original child was called. This is a sobering and scary reminder that many ancient cultures took their sacrifices very seriously. Number 3. Cursed cash. There are many stories of curses throughout history, but one might have occurred as recently as 2013. But the true story takes place 2 years before that. It started with what seemed to be good fortune, when an Illinois man by the name of Wayne Sabage was digging around in his garden harvesting broccoli and discovered a bag that contained $150,000. This should have been the greatest day ever for him, as he was unemployed for some time before the find. He did the right thing and he alerted the police and waited to see if anyone would claim it. Turns out, a neighbor by the name of Dolores Johnson said that she had buried the money because it was cursed. Usually this would be seen as a ploy to try and get the money away from Wayne, but there's a twist here. About 2 years after the money was found, the court was about to make a ruling on who should receive the funds, but both Wayne and Dolores died before that could happen. This was particularly strange, with Wayne dying just 1 week before the ruling and Dolores dying a few months prior. Then after finding out about Wayne's death, his father Kevin went into cardiac arrest. Was this the result of the money being found? It's enough to make anyone wonder. In truth, it's kind of a scary thought. If you found a bag of money that you were told was cursed, what would you do with it? Would you put it back in the ground? Would you put it in your bank account? Maybe donate it to charity? Let me know what you think you would do in the comments section below. Number 2. North Korea unicorn lair. While it would be fascinating and impressive to tell you that there were remains of a unicorn found out there in the world, or even show off some realistic skeletal remains like this, it's not quite possible. Even without any live ones, it would be amazing to discover evidence that proved that unicorns were real all along and just died out. Sadly, that's not what happened. But North Korea tried to make people believe it happened though, and that's no joke. Back in November of 2012, news outlets from North Korea stated that they had found the lair of a unicorn in their country that apparently dated back to an ancient king in the region. But obviously this was a lie. It was the latest piece of false propaganda news that was meant to help solidify the reign of Kim Jong-un and make North Korea appear more important. To be honest, if unicorns did exist, I'm not sure why they'd choose to live in North Korea. Sadly, there's no way that the government of the country would ever let us get close to them. However, this discovery is certainly a hoax, and not a very convincing one at that. Number 1. Body in a tree trunk. In 2015, a body was found in the trunk and roots of a tree near Calooney in County Sligo, Ireland. The tree itself was 215 years old, and thus this was an ancient death. And the only reason the body was found was due to a strong wind blowing the tree over, and the body being found during the cleanup of the incident. The catch here is that the person technically wasn't stuffed up a tree, but rather, the bones got caught up in the roots of the tree as it grew, and that's how it ended up where it was. After archaeologists observed the body, they discovered the young man who was killed and buried here, near where the tree would be, was over 1,000 years old, and thus from the medieval period of history. How did he get there, though? And how did he die? Was he a knight or maybe a peasant farmer? Scientists just don't know for sure. The fact that he was killed was scary enough, but for him to be found via the roots of a tree that was blown over, well, that must have been quite an image. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these scary discoveries that were made from studying things buried underground? Which of these items or discoveries did you find the most terrifying? What else do you think is awaiting us as we dig deeper and deeper into our Earth? Do you know any other terrifying item that was found that would fit into this list? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to World List, and I'll see you next time on the channel.